Again, this is a four-part series, so this is the first one. I'll be presenting the first two. In fact, let's go and switch to the next slide here. So that is me. So I'm a senior application engineer, and yes, I do have gray hair, but I'm not that senior. I've definitely been around SOLIDWORKS for quite some time, so 21 years around SOLIDWORKS CAD and SOLIDWORKS Electrical ever since the SOLIDWORKS acquired it, SOLIDWORKS Corporate acquired it. So, but definitely been around this product for quite some time. So this particular product is SOLIDWORKS Electrical Schematics Professional. So that's the one that I'll be presenting today. I will briefly talk about the differences relative to harnesses and connectors and that type of stuff when it comes to the standard version. But all right, so let's go and dive into the next slide here. So let's kind of look at that. This is the roadmap of what we're looking at today. So kind of give you an idea of what we're going to touch on. Again, time-wise, we'll have to see if there's any questions or time for Q&A at the end there. There is a lot of stuff I want to cover with this first one. And notice that I'm not doing any 3D stuff in this one. That is next week, so make sure you sign up for next week's session. And then the advanced stuff that my counterpart, Jonathan Lieber, is actually doing on the third and fourth session. So make sure you sign up for all four of these. So obviously today you're here. So, but let's go and dive in here. So, connector basics. So one of the big things to kind of point out, kind of differences between the Electrical Schematics Professional and Electrical Schematic Standard is there is I call it a wizard, but it's essentially a dynamic way of creating connectors, or a connector. No, I can't not call it a wizard, because that's what it is. It basically allows you to dynamic change those type of things. So we're going to go and jump into electrical itself and kind of see what I've got going here. In fact, just a brief moment here. I'm going to kind of start out with this package or this page here, but I'm going to go and open up kind of where we're going type of roadmap here, just to give you an idea. And this webinar is kind of more of a little bit of a how-to, a little bit of what's going on type of thing, but at the same time learning what's available. So this gives you a quick preview of kind of what we're going to be doing, what we're kind of heading towards. Different elements, aspects, that type of thing, as far as things you can build into a project to describe a harness. I'll even get into a more complex example at the very end. And we'll also kind of bring up a single line or a one-line drawing there as well too. So that's kind of where we're going with this. And then also some pretty detailed reports too. So we'll be hitting that area as well. So right away, kind of diving into creating connectors. So the very simple way of doing that is you go Schematic tab, you go Insert Symbol, and well, you can hit Other Symbol, and in the default installs you have connectors category, and there's some built-in ones there already. I did make one change with these already. I think it had a default root of like CN or something, so it always wanted to make my connectors CN1, CN2, but I removed that. That can be done over in the library side of thing. But the drawback to this style of connector is if I drop it in, it's going to pop up saying, okay, it's going to be a P1 as far as a plug there, or jack, or whatever you want to present it with. And then you assign the manufacturer part. And really you have to kind of know how many pins you're needing before you go selecting the manufacturer part. The other part of this is it's not real dynamic in the sense of if I'm needing to split it, maybe do 10 pins on this page and another 20 pins on the other page, especially if you're doing one of those big round, what is it, 38999 military connectors and stuff. So so this one will work. This is how you would do it if you're using SOLIDWORKS Standard, SOLIDWORKS Electrical Schematic Standard. But let's dive straight into doing it with the connector wizard here. So I'm going to cancel out of inserting that one, and I'm going to go over to the connector wizard here. So the connector wizard, first time you open a project, it's going to say, hey, do you want to create a new connector or continue on with something existing if you have a connector already in the existing project. So that's why it's asking that. Otherwise, it would go straight into a new creation. So this wizard allows you to pick which manufacturer part you want to start with. So right away you get number of circuits, number of pins, all that type of stuff. I'm going to be using some Molex for this first one, and then we'll talk about some of the other two that I've got on there as well. So I'll go and search my listing here. And there's my particular connector. And you can kind of go about doing connectors a slightly different way. And I guess that's one of the things I want to kind of dive into. I'm starting with connectors. We build into that. We go into adding wires, and then all that turns into a harness. And we'll kind of go into why we do that a little bit later. But when we're talking connectors, I'm going to bring up the properties here. The properties is, okay, yes, we're collecting stuff. Yeah, I've got some kind of garbage stuff there in the supplier and stock number there. But I go down the road of, I like to grab my housing or my connector itself and add my circuit information to that. You could technically go down a different route and have your connector and then add your circuit information to your pins, and then depending on how many pins you put in, you can kind of change the number of circuits. The reason I do it this way is when we get into the 3D side of things, it tends to lend itself better on the 3D side of things as well too. Also, if you're doing from to lists or connection lists, this also works out a lot better as well too. Yes, we will add some pins, but we'll get to that as a secondary thing. So no changes on the manufacturer part properties there. I'm just going to go and add one to the project. So it's got 4 on there. I'll go and hit select. Assigns the root mark, or the component mark as we call here in the States. And the manufacturer part's already in there. So it basically takes us right into a component properties of a new connector. So when I hit OK there, it gives us a dialog over here on the left. And you can technically still use this dialog to insert a static symbol, like the ones that I was just showing through the insert symbol. And really, there's not a whole lot of difference. But the big difference is it shows up as a different icon in your component tree. But you do get a couple more functionalities, again, with this top configuration. With the out-of-the-box software, you do get a couple of configuration files. So you have the dynamic connector without pins, and then another one with pins. And pins is kind of what we're seeing here on my existing one, the P2 and P3 there, where based off of the circuit gender or circuit type in the manufacturer part, it'll allow us to pull a different symbol as a pin, male pin, female pin, ANSI, IEC, that type of thing. So you can kind of pick that. The real advantage of even using the out-of-the-box config files is I can very easily say, okay, I only want to do 2 pins now, and it dynamically changes in size. So it only is going to display 2 rather than displaying 4 there. In fact, I'll go and turn my grid on here just so I can kind of use that as an alignment there to that pin 1 of the other side. I'll go and drop this in. I'm going to erase it here in a moment, but I just want to let you kind of see what it does there. So when I drop in 1 pin, 2 of those, one of those connectors to the terminals actually get used, and then the other 2 allow me to continue working. And I am set to do a repeat, and mind you, I am presenting this in 2021 version of electrical. The same process works in older versions. It also works in 2022. The reason I've developed this kind of file set in 21 because that tends to be, at this point in time, the majority of the people that I assist. So that being said, I could drop this these other two pins somewhere else on this page, or I could cancel out of this. In fact, if I went to another page, and I'm not actually going to do that, but if I went to another page, I could say insert connector again, and then I can continue on with the remaining pins of the last one that I dropped in. So the out of the box, not too bad. I like to tweak it a little bit more. So let's go ahead and take a look at the config file that drives this. So I'm going to go and delete that P1 connector. And actually, before we even look at the config file, I want to jump over to the Components tab here. On the Components tab, when you add a connector via the Connector Wizard, or the Connector Dynamic Insertion, if you want to read the little pop-up balloon there. So it actually sets this connector as permanent, so you get that little infinity or continuum sign there. So if you delete the symbol, it actually stays in the project, and that's kind of intended behavior, so that you could delete it and it's like, oh, okay, I had 3 pins this time, now I need 5 pins or something. Well, you just come back to the tree after you delete it and insert connector from the right click. I'm going to go and erase that because I'm going to use my own config file to do that, the P1 connector. Alright, so jumping over to the Projects tab, or in 2022 it's called the Electrical Projects tab, so they changed the name of that one. But I go and hit the down arrow on the Configuration button, and then there's a Connector Configurator Manager there. So I'll go and open that up, and you can see there's 2 different sides to this dialog. So even though we're on the Projects tab, this is one of those dialogs that gives us information that is server level. So this, the left side is the application configurations. That's your electrical server that you're attached to. The right-hand side that shows up in green is config files that are actually specific to the project that you're currently in. So this one is a project level specific one, and that's just so I can archive and unarchive it a bunch of times. But at any point in time, you can take that config file and add it back to the application by pushing it back over. 21 and older, you get a little button up here. 22, you actually get some arrows to in between these two to push them back and forth. So a little difference there. So I'm going to open up this config file that I created just to kind of run through it real quick. And let's go and get that brought over to this screen here so we can go and see it. General tab is name and description, nothing fancy with that. But on the Shape tab, this is where I go through and actually start doing some additional modifications. So I go through and I change some of the values here. If you've never seen this interface before, the letters on the image, and mind you, this is a dynamic image, or dynamic preview, if you will, so I can actually zoom in, kind of pan, all that goodness. So I look at those letters, and then I can look at the far left column. So over here on the far left there, those give me, okay, what that value is driving. So I changed it to be a little bit narrower. I think I may have even changed the radius there a little bit. So I've gone through and made some changes to it. One of the other things that is probably underutilized even by myself in the shape is these comb positions. So combs are these little like C-shaped things that show up on the connector. Those come about when you edit the manufacturer part or create a manufacturer part, and then you do some circuit grouping. So the circuit grouping allows those combs to show up on the inserted connector there. The other thing that I'll typically do is I'll turn on a cross-reference for same level. The purpose of this is if I have that connector in multiple pages, they will reference each other. So I'll actually say, okay, this is the first one of that connector, it's seeing the other one on page 10 or something, and then the other one will see this one on page 4. So I'll usually turn that on as same level there. Jumping over to the Attributes tab, this is where we create their labels. They're technically symbol files. They're kind of done just the way as a symbol file, but they're label files. And these are just symbols of attributes. So this one in the middle here is the one that describes essentially what information I'm going to pull into that connector when I drop in. So tag being the component mark, and then ref description being a manufacturer info there. And then down here at the bottom, that's actually the manufacturer description. I always get those mixed up there. But and then you also have the distances of where those are being positioned. So you have your A and B values up top there. So these are files that you can edit. My recommendation is go into Library, Symbols Manager, copy the existing one. So find where that one is at in the library, copy it, modify the copy, come back in here and search for that modified version of it, just so you can kind of do your own thing as far as that information goes. The connection point, this is for each occurrence where I have a terminal occur on my symbol, what information do I want to show up next to it? So p tag, if you've done any symbol creation, that attribute is for the terminal number, so that's where the terminal number would show up. Then you also have two other ones, and it's a little harder to see because they're kind of squished into each other, but the P, MNE is a mnemonic, and then you have utilization. So typically the terminal number or terminal mark and the mnemonic are stored in the manufacturer part field. The utilization can be done after the fact in edit connection or edit terminals there. So I'll bring that up so you can kind of see where all those fields will populate. And again, that gives us 3 bits of information that we can have next to each terminal there. The interesting tab, so this one is the Circuits tab. So this one is where I kind of get a little creative sometime and focus just on the top up here. So we actually have, if I highlight one of the circuit types, and it always zooms back out, but if I look at this first one, so if the manufacturer part is set to auxiliary female pin for that circuit, it'll actually define what symbol is going to show up there. And mind you, this symbol does contain other attributes. In fact, if you look at the preview down here, we've got another terminal number, we got a tag there. Those attributes are actually stripped off. It actually uses the information from attributes or connection point that shows up next to it. So that's the symbol for that circuit type. If I jump over to a different circuit type, then I'll actually have a different pin type. So you can set these all to ANSI style or to IEC style. IEC being the kind of the male pin being the shaded box there, a female one being the half shape U shape there. We jump over to the power ones. This is typical of ANSI. Okay. Again, you can define what pins are occurring for what circuit is showing up there. So if you had, again, one of those 38999, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, or 38999 connectors, and you've got male-female pin connectors throughout the entire connector. It doesn't have to be one gender with those. You can still use this dynamic connector, and it'll show you the different pin style next to that particular gender. Okay. All right. I'll go and close out of this. I didn't make any changes to it, just kind of went through the run-through of what the config file that drives that is. So no changes there. Later we'll come back to this 2-pin one, which gets a little bit more interesting. So, all right, so I'm going to go and use that one to create my connector now. So I'll go and go back to the Schematic tab, Insert Connector. I'm going to create a new connector because I want it to be my P1 there that dropped off. Again, I'm using Molex for this first one. I'm going to go and grab my connector there. Which actually, let me go into the properties once again here for a sec. So looking at the properties of the manufacturer part of this Molex Circuits and Terminals tab, there's our grouping. Gosh, I've drawn a blank here. I don't remember if it's circuit grouping or pin grouping. So essentially the idea is if you select two of them, and then you say, okay, this is group 1, group 2, or whatever value you put in there. That causes those to be grouped together, causes the combs to show up on the dynamic connector. Down below, in fact, I'll select all 4 of my circuits up above, but down below we have our mnemonics. So we have our terminal mark, and we have our mnemonic. So those can be added at the manufacturer, meaning it's generic for all projects when I use this particular connector. Okay. So we'll cancel out of that, no changes, but again, that's a manufacturer level thing. Added it to the project here. I'll select that. P1, great. I'll go ahead and hit OK there. And I'll talk about adding pins in a little bit here too, so I'll hit OK there as well. I'm going to change the config file, so I'm not using the default one that's there. I'm going to go and grab one of my green ones that's project level at the moment. Okay. I'm going to go and do all 4 pins there, and I'll just go and place this off to the side there. And again, I'm going to line them up just to make the lines a little bit easier there. So that drops in my connector, gives me my symbol, my mnemonic. If I wanted to add a utilization, and this is the thing I couldn't remember the term exactly for, but the edit symbol terminal. So if I go into this option, and you can technically do that in the component properties as well, but I can go through and add a utilization that is specific to this connector for this project. So I could go put values in here. So I'll go and say fun, happy time pizza. There we go. Oh, PZ. Pizza. There we go. So I put in my utilization, and that shows up as a label next to my connector. So I can, again, use 3 bits of information for each terminal there. All right. So let's go and jump into talking about the pins. So a lot of the times when you're building a project of a harness, you're wanting to get down to the pin level information. You might have pins, locking clips, backshells, all that great stuff there. So on a very simple level, and you can do this with any device. It doesn't have to be a connector, but I can go back into the component properties. So double click, manufacturer parts and circuit, and search for a manufacturer part that I created. So I don't have mine set up as auxiliary, so I'm just going to set that as an all here. It is still Molex, and then there's my pins. So I need 4 of those pins, so I'll go and add 4 of those in to my list. And I'll show you another easier or faster way of doing that. So I'll hit select, and now I've counted for my pins. Those will show up in my bill of material. Okay. No circuit information on there. I'm just getting them part of P1 there. Okay. All right, let's go and do some wires. So I'm just going to do some real quick ones here. So there's my turquoise, just because I don't have a white wire that shows up well on white backgrounds. And I'll go and pick out some other colors here. So I'll go and do a black. And then also gonna maybe come up from the bottom here with maybe one of the other colors. Let's go and do red. So we'll go and come up and over. Notice I'm drawing into the connector. Once I right click one more time to get out, it does the trimming for me. Another thing that if you say I'm still set to red, another nice thing about this software is I can pick an existing line. Even though I have the wrong line color set, I pick on that existing line and it sets the appropriate wire style for me. So if you start from existing and then draw away from it, you have that convenience of it knowing what's going on there. Yeah, you're probably also seeing that little nodal indicator that I'm having there. And I'm making a little bit of a mess out of how I'm drawing this, but I'm getting them connected here. So I did another black one there. Let's see, let's go and do one other color. I think I've got a blue one that I'll drop in. Oh, clicked too many times there when I selected it. Let's go and try that again. And let's go and get that one connected down here. So nothing fancy with that, just regular wires being drawn in. And I'll talk about these little guys here in a moment. but certainly something that I like to turn on. Those are nodal indicators. But all right, so give me one sec here. So jumping back to PowerPoint. So when we start talking about harnesses, and this is kind of where we're edging into kind of other information here, we start with wires. That's where we start with. Those wires can be turned into cables, and this is one of the things definition-wise that I always explain when I'm teaching one of my regular classes is the industry kind of terminology of a cable. We kind of picture, like if I said an HDMI cable, well, you picture a bunch of conductors, an outer jacket, and then connectors at both ends of it. Whereas electrical kind of describes that a little different. So wires are just that, straight individual conductors. A cable generally is a bunch of conductors with an outer jacket. Not necessarily with the ends on it. You can define it either way, but generally it's if we're converting wires into cables, it's just, okay, conductors and an outer jacket. When we get into harnesses, that's where we're collecting everything together. So we're collecting our wires, collecting our connectors, and even cables if we did turn some of them into an outer jacket. And all that is getting turned into a harness. So this is kind of something to wrap your head around if you haven't dealt with harnesses a little bit. So that being said, let's see. Actually, you know what? Let me bring up this little quote that this is kind of a rough thing of what I live by or teach by, I guess, if you will. I've been doing engineering documentation for years, mechanical side, electrical side, so full spectrum there. And I always find that it's a good idea to kind of know who your end consumer of that documentation is and cater your documentation to that. And it's funny, in the early days, it was basically, when I was doing mechanical, it was just so that the production manager wouldn't come back into my office and ask me questions. But there's some merit to that, though. If you provide them just enough information that they get what they need to do, they don't have to continue coming back and asking for details. If you overdo it, it can be just as bad. So something to kind of take to heart when you're creating documentation here. So before we dive into the creation of a harness itself, we're going to go through and throw some extra stuff on here. So this is a quick little preview slide of some of the items there that you can add to a schematic, again, for that information or translation or transmission of information, I should say. So we'll get into wire numbers, bumps, that type of stuff, and I'll even talk about the nodal indicator there. So, all right, so let's get back to electrical here. And yeah, it looks like I think I'm doing good on time. All right, so one of the very first things that I right off the bat is these things, these little arrows indicating direction of where the wires are at. And that's something, if you haven't been around electrical long, it's certainly one thing to check out. It's in your project configuration, so project tab, project configuration, so up over here. And it's on the graphics tab, and I think a lot of the default templates have it turned off. I always like to turn it on. And the reason being is when we have wires intersecting other wires, I don't really know okay, which way the majority of the wires are going. And no, this is not a splice. This is just saying, okay, I have one line indicating the other one. So I have, if we just look at the pin 1s and this green wire coming down, well, in fact, they're all pin 1s there, 3 locations, well, you have to have 2 wires to do that, right? That's a bare minimum. So there could be 2 wires coming over to the pin 1 over here on P1, or I could have 2 wires coming over to P2, or both of those could be coming down and coming over to P3. So there's not a visual way to see that. When we're in the software, it's a kind of an easy thing to do. I right-click over the wire properties, and okay, that segment that I'm over has 2. If I come over to this segment, that one only has one. But again, conveyance of information. So if we turn on Nodal Indicators, again, project configuration, back over to the graphics tab, turn this little guy back on at the bottom down there. You can set the size there as well too. Very easily we can say, okay, hey, we've got one wire coming up and over, we have another one going over. If I need to change that orientation, I can easily go in here and do Edit Connection Path. This is a very fast way of doing it. You can technically do the same thing under wire cabling order. That one, it's more wordy than anything. I like a visual thing, so that's the Edit Connection Path. So I can say, okay, I actually want two wires going over there. So it's actually two wires going to the left. Or if I wanted two wires going down, I could actually do that as well. So you can kind of define how those are actually wired. In one of the later series that my counterpart is doing, he'll actually show you splices. So these are not splices; these are just intersections of sketches on a schematic. So that's one item as far as information. Another item that I've get fairly often requests for, and it's down here in the symbols. So I said Schematic tab, Insert Symbols, Other Symbols. Down here under Wiring Systems, we have this thing called a bump. And the idea behind a bump is illustrating or indicating that, okay, that wire is not well, connecting to this one that it's crossing over. So if you have nodal indicators, I feel like you don't need the bumps. The other thing is this is a manual process, so you would have to add those in. If you come from the circuit board or the PCB industry, well, there are software that do those automatically for us. But for us, it's what's called a passive symbol. It's basically something that is not a component. It just adds that to the we just add it to the schematic for information there. So I'm gonna, well, I'll go and leave that one on there just so you can do that. But let's see. Let's look at a couple of other things here. So if we go back into Insert here, I jump back up to Miscellaneous, and bumps are in the default software. Miscellaneous, we also have some of these other things, these little loops going around the device there. And you can kind of use them for indicating shields. You can also use them indicating for twisted pairs. My only thing about these is these also show up as components in your bill of materials, and unless you set it to exclude, but it is something that does show up in the bill of materials. So I've gone a little bit further with one of those, and I make a copy of one of them, and I change its properties to be a passive symbol. So when you switch the symbol type to be passive, it strips off the connection points, it strips off any attributes, so it's just a visual thing. So we can use this to illustrate a twisted pair. So again, conveyance of what we're doing with it. So I might say, okay, these are those two are a twisted pair, and I'll go and say that those are a twisted pair. Again, getting that information to the end consumer of it. When we get to the 3D side of things, we'll talk about what occurs or what options we have over there. So, but let's do another bit of information here. So along the same lines of a passive symbol, if I grab another one that I created, I'll kind of show you what this looks like. I'll put him down here. It's not quite big enough to go around all four, but I'll put him on three of the wires. This is a symbol that I created. If you've never used wipeouts before, anything behind a wipeout basically hides those anything behind it. It essentially is a block visually of what's there. So this symbol isn't anything fancy. In fact, I'll open it up real quick here. So it's a passive symbol. So over here on the right-hand side. I added some text to it. I created two ellipses, one on one side, one on the other, and then, in fact, you can kind of see it there. So on the Draw tab is where you get the wipeout shape, and it's just a polyline. And you just go around clicking points. So I just kind of clicked a bunch of points to kind of make it look like a tube there. Okay. Very easy symbol to make. You can make large ones, small ones, all that type of stuff. And this one is just saying, hey, these might be going through an outer jacket. Not to say that I haven't turned these into a cable, which in fact I might even do that. I'll go and select 3 of those wires that are going through there. Right click over it. Go and do associate cable cores. I get into this dialog. I'll go and say new cable. Once it finds my list, there it goes. And I actually don't have one prepared already, but this one will work. It's got 4 conductors. I'm only going to use 3 of it. So I'll go and say, okay, I'm going to use those 3 to match with those 3 and associate it there. So now those are cables, which you got to be careful with that, because if you're doing a passive symbol, some of your descriptions might actually show up behind the passive symbol. So I'll move that one over a little bit, maybe move this one over. And as far as turning them into a cable, it's not a requirement for harness. It's just another option that you can do there. In fact, I'll probably reset those back to regular wires here in a moment. But you know what? Let me just do that before I forget. All right, so I'll go and do a disassociate cable cores. All right, so they're back to just wires there. Another thing is when we do our reports, electrical does our components on one report, wires on another report, and cables on a third report. They are separated. So one of another common request that we've gotten is customers saying, okay, do we want the components and the cables to show up on the same bill of materials? Well, so to that point, I made a different version of that same symbol. This one, however, is not a passive. It's just a multi-wire symbol, just like a regular symbol would be. So I would, in essence, drop it into my project, say that it's going to be CBL1. That's just because I don't have any other cables in this one. Hit OK there, and that would now become an item in my bill of materials. I would obviously assign a manufacturer part to that, but you can create a symbol that kind of illustrates something, and I kind of got fancy with mine. You could just do like a loop. You don't really have to do the wipeout and all that goodness with it, but this would allow that to show up in the bill of materials there. So let's see. I think there was one other one that I wanted. Oh, the labels. Yeah, these guys. So connection labels. So connection labels is for lack of a better description, it is a symbol. It is essentially a table that is drawn with attributes in it. So it's pulling information from what you attach it to. There are some of these built in to the software. In fact, let's go and insert one here for P1. So the way we insert them, schematic tab, the red style of connection label. The blue one is there. Best way to describe that is the red one does 1 per component. So my P1 that had the connector and the pins would all be described based off of a red one. If I wanted the connector being one table, the pins being another table, I could do 1 per manufacturer. Again, I don't have a good example of the blue one set up, but I'll go with a red one here. All right, so red, other symbols. So there are some built ones in here, but again, they've had set number of rows in there. They also have a pinout that is maybe not necessarily what you're using. So I'm going to go and grab the one that I created. It was a copy of one of the other ones, and I imported a DXF file that has the pinout there, or you could even just draw it in here. This is also a little different, this connection label, in the sense that I changed some of the fields for pin mnemonic utilization, whereas the defaults have different columns there. So just like we would associate something else, another symbol or two symbols to the same component, we do the same thing here. So it's not a new connector, it's actually going to be the existing P1. So I pick it in the tree there to force that association. So it now becomes another item that is part of that same connector, and all of that information, the pin that's starting from, where it's heading off to, is all being pulled in there. And even if we're jumping to other pages, we're giving I do book number, page number, and then the row that it's in. So that information is showing there. But and of course my pin information. So again, we're building information that is useful for the end consumer of the documentation. Let's see here. Let's move on to the next slide here. Oh, you know what? Actually, one sec. I need to take a moment here to jump back over to my single line. So this is describing a harness, or what will be a harness, in multi-line or a schematic page. You can also describe the information in single lines. Single lines, again, I like to combine those. So a single line is for those that don't know how to read schematics. The multi-line is for those that know how to read the schematics, or those that are doing the production of it. So same basic idea there. We insert symbols. I already have that one pre-selected. And with a single line, if you haven't worked with single lines before, I pre-associate there, you essentially have a single line that is describing multiple wires. In fact, if we go into that one wire, or that draw cable, which I hate that term, it should be a draw logical line or draw logic line. But if I go into that and look at the detailing of it, it actually shows the wires that I did on the other page. In fact, so to finish out the rest of the illustration here, so I actually have, I want some going to there, and then I also probably have some wires that actually come over to this other one. Again, I could have technically just gone straight down, but each of these actually indicate how many wires are going from and to there. Okay. Again, illustration, conveyance of information. So optional thing, doing single lines or line diagrams, but definitely something that's part of your toolkit if it makes sense. All right, so now let's go to the next slide here. So next slide. Yay, harness creation. So I'll also toss in a little location mixed into it. So reason for doing location with harnesses is that harness creation, as you'll see here in a moment, visually doesn't do anything for the end consumer. Yes, it helps with reports, and that's kind of the purpose of turning standalone connectors and wires into a harness. So that's kind of the goal here is to get good reporting information, but visually it doesn't do much. So we kind of mix that up with a location outline. So that's kind of where we're going here next. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go into Schematic tab, location outline, do a polyline. And yeah, we are very quickly running out of time. I apologize for that. I'm going to have to speed up a little bit here. So definitely one of those things that time gets away from you very quickly. So, oh, didn't quite make it on the outside there. Let's try that again here. Let's there we go. All right. So the typical location information, we go through and we do L1, L2, that type of thing. The properties of this location, I just changed it to an H number. It's still a location. It's not a harness, but it's just a different verbiage for it. Change all the parts to that same location. That's fine. So visually, this is kind of nice because I can see that that is part of a harness. To turn all of these items into a harness, that's where the magic happens. Is I go through and select everything, and really doesn't have to be all that fancy. I held Control down, did box selects. I don't have to grab all of the wires there. right-click over one of them, and I say Add Remove from Harness. So this allows my wires and components to be part of that harness. In fact, I probably would also grab that cable one too. But so it starts my list. I go and hit Select there. I already have a harness in this project already created, but if you needed to create one, I can say New. And again, this being a harness, harnesses are typically H's. I just changed that location to match there. So, all right. So there's our components collected as a harness. I'm going to go and turn this cable also into that as well. So I'll select it, hit OK there, select the harness, hit OK there again. So very quickly I go through and actually turn that into a harness. So if I didn't have that outline there, again, information wouldn't be there. So why do we do the harness? Well, that's the next slide. Let's get into the report stuff. So, and this is again me picking up the pace here. Sorry about the compression there. We will get this webinar out onto to our YouTube channel, GoEngineer YouTube channel, and I might be able to make a completed version of this project available. Again, it's in the 21 version, so you can open it in 21 or 22. But I've got to do some checking to see if I can do that. But all right, so reports. Let's go to the bill of materials and let's go and take a look at that. So, all right. So jumping back into electrical. So I'm going to go and update my reports. I already have my reports in the project, but I'm going to go through and update them. So project tab, reports, and again, this is just so I can update them all in one shot. I could go to each one, right click and update. I'll go and push all the information to those. And then we'll do a quick comparison of what the out-of-the-box one does versus the custom one. All right, so I'll let that build there. So while that's building, just to keep the pace going here, I'm going to go and bring up my next PowerPoint slide. So the default bill of material report, and I'll tell you which one here in a moment, it kind of throws everything together and it doesn't really break it down very conveniently. So my P1 or my plug 1 there, it's got the connector and all the pins. There's no quantities there. Yes, I do have a manufacturer, and then I have the page number that it's on. Okay, so not very useful information. Well, when we go a little bit further, taking that same one, we modify it and then we filter it. Well, we have the ability of getting information. I'll even show adding that quantity column in a moment here too. So I'm using the location. I'm sorry, not the location, the harness to do the separation of it. Getting the marks, getting all of the part numbers, and then getting my quantities. Again, ones that do physically show on the page actually do have that page number next to them. The rest of them are just part of the bill of material. All right, so all the reports updated there. So let's go and take a look at the modified one here. So modified bill of material. So one of the first parts of this, and there is a section that I did kind of forget or skip over, and I'll have to back up here to kind of get the full information. So this particular one, I do have some additional columns added in. I'll talk about those here in a sec as well. In fact, I have a slide just for that. But on the filters tab, I am using one of the filters, so the exclude items from bill of materials. So the reason I utilize that is, well, backing up to the part that I skipped here. So with P1, I just added the connector, added all the pins, or the locking clip, or whatever other stuff. With this, this P2, rather than doing each item individually, so I double-clicked on it, I'm in the component properties, I actually have a electrical assembly. So if you haven't done electrical assemblies, look up on how to create those. The idea behind an electrical assembly is it's a collection of parts all in one file. So this kit number, or electrical assembly, contains, in fact, I'll bring that up here also. Contains the manufacturer part of the connector itself and all of the pins. Or in the case of my Amphenol one, that's the P3 one, it actually contains, well, the back shell and the screws and all that other stuff with it. The reason I'm bringing this up now is when I add an electrical project or electrical assembly to a project, well, I end up with a part for one of each of the items below it, and I also end up with one at the top level. So I end up almost with duplicates here. So after I've added it to the project, the electrical assembly, I would go to the properties and I would say, okay, exclude it from the bill of materials because I don't want the kit to show up. I want the individual pieces. But electrical assemblies are a very convenient way, and I don't want to update the catalog. I could though, but electrical assemblies are a very easy way of adding those items in. If I find that I only was using 2 pins instead of 3, I could just select the number of pins and delete those, and those wouldn't show up in the bill of materials there. Okay. All right. So let me go and update my BOM one more time here again, just individually here, and then we'll open it up. Oh, let's go and close that OK and hit open that up there. So again, a little bit more useful information. I need to regroup that as a harness. One sec here. Let's go and re-add that back to the harness. So right-click or just the connector itself. And you can add stuff to a harness multiple times. See how my harness column does not say it's already attached to a harness? Just by selecting Add or Remove. I can come back in here and I can add that symbol again. So now if I highlight it, okay, it's all part of H1. All right, now I'll update my bill of material once again. Should have been going at this pace the entire time, right? A lot of information, right? So component marks, references, drawings there. I'm going to bring up a slide here that shows the modifications that was done to the report here, because that's going to be the easiest way of presenting that. So some of the columns can be done in a manual sense. So I did change the sorting. So this is the sort and break modifications there. So if you do happen to have a screenshot program open, you can screenshot this, or again wait for the actual video to come out. So that's one of the things that's changed from the default report. Which, by the way, the default report is the bill of materials with electrical assemblies sorted by mark. So that's a default report in the newer version. So 21 for sure. 20, I think the later service packs have it. 19, you can certainly create the same one in an older version, but it's not already in there. And then the next slide here. These are the SQL query modifications. So again, this is one of those things I'm unfortunately running out of time of. This could be one of those, this could almost be a whole webinar by itself, but the big one to really kind of take away from, so if you go to advanced mode to edit your report config file, and you go into that advanced mode, and you edit it, this line, so comma space 1 as element count, that gives you the ability of adding an EL count value to your table there. In fact, let me see. I think, yeah, that's the very next slide here. And then 2 additional variables, the harness variables that aren't part of that. So right here, so without that, let me back up one slide so you can see it. Without the as element count, with the percent on either side, just above the from, so I notice we're all the way at the bottom, that value actually does add that into the variables that you can pick from. I'm hoping to get a blog article just on that out, hopefully before the end of the year. But certainly worth contacting one of us, and we can kind of assist with report modifications. That's another good option for a mentoring session. So, and then my harness variables that I brought in, so harness and location stuff there. But all right, so we are out of time. I totally understand if you do have to bail and get to something else. I will actually continue on just a little bit longer for those that can stick around. Again, I apologize for going long, but lots of information, short amount of time. So let's continue on through the slides here. So wire list report. This is another kind of preview difference between the two different reports. So one of the big ones is changing the connection from and to. We've gotten requests from customers that they don't want to see the function, they don't want to see the location. Remember, my location is called H1. So you can modify formulas, and it's on the next slide here, to remove that. Color codes. Those aren't real accurate from what I've heard. They're not necessarily industry standard ones. And then let's see, I think I added 2 different lengths in there. So the millimeter or meters was there. I switched it to millimeters, and then also did an inch one. Let's see here. Let's look at those modifications here. So the length, not too bad. You basically make another column of almost the same thing, but then you do that divide by 25.4, which is the millimeters to inch conversion thing that we learned back in engineering school or even math class. I think I probably learned that one. And then these two, the ones that are in yellow there, these are the modified versions of them. Essentially, I'm grabbing a different variable from a different table, and then I'm bringing those in to the if statement there. Again, when you watch the replay of this, you can certainly look for those other variables, or again, a mentoring session would be a good report customization session. So, all right, next one, connection list. This one, I don't know. I like it, but I don't like it. I've gotten kind of different info from different customers over the years. And mind you, it's been lots of years there in electrical, and different people like different information. And again, I haven't quite come up with one that I'm really liking a whole lot. But this is kind of again another modification that can be done to bring the wireless stuff. And this would be a good option opposed to doing the connection labels. So the connection labels on the schematic itself, which you have to manually create in current versions of electrical. Whereas a report is an automated way. It's you wouldn't have to worry about that being a manual, create a new symbol every time I buy a new connector. So, all right, last slide, which is just promoting my next webinar. So that's certainly definitely something to register for, where we take this 3 connector into the 3D realm of things. So we'll actually use the electrical 3D add-in for SOLIDWORKS CAD to actually route this harness there. All right, so looks like most of you are still around. I've got one final thing just to tease you with a little bit. Well, I guess tease or open your minds. It's not going to be on another webinar, at least this year. Could be another webinar next year or something. So maybe there's the tease part of it. But so this being a very simple single 3-pin connector, defining just the harness itself. And we can kind of expand on that with another one, in the sense that we actually get into, let's see, where do I have, yeah, here we go, this guy. So this project goes a little bit further in the sense that, okay, yes, we still have the three connectors there. We threw in some splices, so there's something you'll be picking up from my counterpart, Jonathan Lieber, in a later session. So 3 or 4, depending on where he puts those. And then this config file, again, I still use the insert connector, so it's a dynamic config file, but this one is set up to have pins on both sides. The idea behind that is I go through and when I create my manufacturer part, I'll bring that up here, actually label both sides. So it's pin 1, but I say an A and B side. So A being on the input, B being, okay, what I'm plugging that into. The reason for doing 2 terminals per circuit for this manufacturer part and also for that connector is it gives me a little bit more information that I can actually show where that connector is being plugged into. So I can actually say, hey, it's being plugged into something further downstream. And what I mean by downstream is these aren't wires. These are wires that were turned into bridges. So if you don't want a wire to show up on a wire list report, you right-click over that wire and you say, turn it into a bridge, create bridge. So this bridge, which was a wire, goes on to another page here. So I jump over to that other page, and that illustrates that I'm plugging into this other connector, and it's continuing on into something else. So you can actually create a system of things with the connectors as well too. So you can get a little bit more complex with it. So I might try and do this one next year. So if you don't see it on the schedule, definitely hit me up there. So all right, so I'm going to wrap this up and put on the final slides here. I just threw some stuff together just to kind of give you a little bit more fun stuff to know about GoEngineer. So we've recently expanded, so we're actually no longer just those office locations. We're actually coast to coast there. So, but again, thank you everybody for attending. Looks like I've had about half of you stay a little bit longer there. So.